Hello, and welcome to the Hello, I'm Grieving podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Julie Shaw, founder of the Hello, I'm Grieving community, where we focus on acknowledging and dealing with grief to live a full life. Our tagline, Say Hello to Grief, emphasizes the importance of courageously acknowledging and engaging intentionally with grief so we can find hope, lessons, motivation, and healing in the midst of our pain. Today, we have the opportunity to say hello to Marielle Cuison. And Marielle is a death doula and civil engineer behind the Death Engineer. She cares about guiding others through end of life planning and exploration and sharing openly about death and grief. So let's say hello to Marielle. And I'm so happy that you're here and we finally get to have a conversation and learn about everything that you do and learn about your grief. Marielle, um, I would love for you to kind of start off, maybe even with the big question, like, what is your grief? Where does it stem from? Maybe how did you start saying hello to it?
Yeah, I guess like as an adult, I started to really own like the experience of like grief and being like able to openly tell people like, oh, I'm grieving. It kind of started when my grandpa on my mom's side, so my mom's dad, when he died in 2016. That kind of was like my first like impactful death where I was like, oh, like, I looking back, I was like, I should have taken more time off of work. I should have taken more time to like acknowledge like what I was feeling in the moment. So that was like as an adult where I was like, okay, this is grief. And it also was like the pandemic helped me realize like, oh, you don't have to like lose a person in your life for you to feel grief. So that was like the
Exactly.
pandemic was when I started to see it, the word grief being used for other things. But I guess as an adult, I also think back to like my childhood where I'm like, oh, like when did I experience grief? But in the time, I didn't realize like that's what I was experiencing. So like my earliest experience was when I was I think I was like maybe 3 or 4. But I had this stuffed animal that I brought with me everywhere. I couldn't sleep without it. It was like it was like my homie everywhere I went. I just always had that with me. Like it was like my best friend. But then one night as kids like you get sick a lot, so I like woke up and I was like vomiting and I was okay, but it was just, I might have ate something. But I threw up on my stuffed animal. So then my mom and my dad have very different approaches to like how we take care of our belongings. So my mom was like, okay, we'll wash it. It'll be okay. And my dad was like, oh, just throw it away so that you can get a
Mhm.
new one. Right. But then the thing is that my dad, and I always like get on him about this now as an adult, but he told me to throw it in the garbage can so that the recycling people will clean it and bring it back. So
Aw.
so I was like, okay. So then I threw it away. And then my parents told me that like I would wait by the window for the
Uh-huh.
recycling people to bring it back until I realized like, oh yeah, like
Isn't coming back.
yeah. And then just kind of like I think I had to just accept that like my stuffed animal was gonna come back. But
Mhm.
then I eventually found like a new stuffed animal to replace. And it's funny because I actually named it the same name. So
Mhm.
it's almost like, did I ever really like move on from having like that stuffed animal when I found like a replacement one, named it the same thing. But then even as an adult, I still have like that very vivid memory of throwing away and then also like waiting for it and realizing
Mm.
like, oh, it's not, I'll never have that ever again.
Yeah.
So,
It
and it's
it
funny.
shows it
Hmm.
shows kind of also, everybody how you started off, like there's other things we can grieve. And
Hmm.
even looking back, it makes me think of, okay, well, what are the things as a child that we think how early on we're exposed to grief? And
Hmm.
even through the toy, that beloved toy, that there are things that we learn those lessons early. And even how you're saying, what are the stories that people tell us
Hmm.
so that we can deal with that grief of it as well?
Yeah. Like I'm wondering, was my dad maybe just trying to protect me from those emotions at the time of saying,
Mhm.
we're going to get rid of this and you'll never see it again.
Yeah.
So, and it's funny
Or
because,
or can I interject here too, or I wonder if it's with me being a new parent too, is like you don't want to have to deal with the pain associated
Yeah,
that,
that too.
is there going to be a tantrum? Is there going to be like
Hmm.
all these emotional bursts that come out from it that then we have to deal with. So
Hmm.
sometimes it's folks are trying to maybe, you know, serve themselves in that space too, while also trying to care about you.
Especially like knowing that I couldn't sleep without that. So they probably were like, "Hey, how are we going to, deal with this moving forward?" And luckily, like since I got like I think shortly after I got a new stuffed animal, and what's funny is that so that was like 30 years ago, and I actually still have that stuffed animal.
Aw.
Yeah, because I'm like, okay, now I'm not losing her. Like she is, and it's funny because it's just known in my family that I have that stuffed animal, that teddy bear that I've had since I was like 4.
Aw.
So, and then my parents like joke about it, and they're like, yeah, we know that you lost the first one, and now you have your second one. So yeah, so
Yeah.
I just think about that because I'm like, oh yeah, I there was no word for it. Like, how do you describe like grief to kids?
Mhm.
And then just thinking about how like kids experience grief all the time, and
Mhm.
and like at the time too, like my stuffed animal, that's my world. Like,
Yeah.
that was like my go-to for everything. And it was like it felt like an extension of me because that was like all I knew. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's get to the death engineer. I think that's such a bold name. And so I can see just from your, understanding you have your engineering background, like technically,
Mhm.
but then you're also in this death and grief space. So tell us about everything about the death engineer, who you are when I feel like you're in that role,
Mhm.
and how the death engineer can help and service others.
Yeah, so the name itself acted as like it was almost a joke at first because at the time, so when I first like I needed a name for like an Instagram account I wanted to create where I can just post all about like deathly things and all of my curiosities around death and grief. So this was in 2020, like late 2020. But then I was actually already going through this like maybe for a year prior to that, I was going through this phase of like, oh, I think I want to try something other than engineering because like I got into civil engineering mostly because I was influenced by my family. So my grandpa was a civil engineer, and then my auntie's a civil engineer, and my mom worked in the industry, and then I have like other uncles and aunties who all are engineers too. So this was like a joke where my mom would always say like I'd always tell people like, oh, my mom's always like, oh yeah, you can be whatever you want in life as long as you're an engineer. So
Oh,
it's like
yep.
yeah. So and I mean I'll give them credit. Like I know that them choosing the civil engineering or engineering profession helped them also like come to America and like from the Philippines and
Yep.
find like stable jobs and government jobs. Like that's what a priority for them was, like security and stability. So then my joke was like, okay, well, if I can be an engineer, I'm going to be any kind of engineer. So I was like, what if
Mm,
I'm the death engineer? So,
okay.
and it's funny because when I first told her the name, I was like, oh, mom, I have this Instagram account. And then she just like had this face where it was like she was kind of just like laughing, like just like, but then in like for a little of her response, I could tell where she's like, oh, that's a good one. Like, I don't know, I
Mm,
just like,
you have some
sensed it.
validation there. That's nice.
Yeah,
That's nice.
exactly. And then other people I tell, like, they're all like, that's like some of my aunties I've talked to about this are like, that's not like the best name for it. That doesn't make sense. But then everyone remembers it. So,
Mhm, mhm.
so then, yeah, so that's kind of where like the name came from. And then also like I'm realizing there are a lot of like overlaps between my work as a civil engineer and then also in the death care space because civil engineering like since I've worked for like local agencies as like a public servant and public service, so it's like a lot of it is like helping other people and then like
Mm,
empathizing for the communities you're designing for and working for. So I've always felt like it was very like people centric and just thinking about like the people and what they're experiencing. So, and then also because I work in transportation, civil engineering, so it's
mhm.
something that like touches everyone's lives, but almost like you're living through it and you don't realize that like how much it's affecting you. So that's kind of like death care too. Like,
Yeah.
you're just living through your life, you're experiencing grief, but then it just touches like everyone in different
Yeah.
ways. Yeah.
Yeah. And it intersects with so many parts of your life, right? Like even understanding transportation is even talking about access to
Mm-hmm.
transportation, how we're able to get from point A to point B, who's
Mm-hmm.
along for the ride with us, who's there sitting alongside of us. Like I can see all these different analogies even with
Mm-hmm.
that transportation and how that translates into the grief space. And I feel as you're talking about how you're taking those skills with you, how do you feel that has translated into the death care space for you? And how are you helping people as they're traveling and as they're navigating their own grief?
Yeah, it's like it's funny that you mentioned the analogy of like point A to point B because that's also how I feel with like death care. It's like helping you with like your journey from like life to death to like
Mm,
that journey. So it's like, and I view it as like it's so much more than just like where you are and then where you want to go when it comes to transportation and also with like death care and grief and everyone's like end of life experience because there's like so much more that goes into it. So it's like considering like their environment and then all the different like factors that can affect that. So it's like looking at it like holistically. So I feel like
mm,
if I were to support someone with like exploring like their end of life exploring end of life planning and what they want, you realize like, oh, their values come into it, but their
mm,
family, how it'll affect their family also comes into that conversation. So it's so much more than just them saying like, oh, okay, well, I want this, so I want to do that. But then it's like almost a ripple effect that like, you know, it connects back to like what how it affects their family, like their interests, like things like that. So it's kind of like this interesting, if I were to like visualize it, it almost feels like a map and like a
yeah.
chaotic but like beautiful map that everyone has on how they can view their end of life experience.
Yeah. And how that can possibly change, right?
Yeah,
Like
that too.
you might set this plan, but something happens and you have to take a detour
Hmm.
on that map. I'm also wondering, as a death doula, as someone who is helping people engineer and plan their end of life, when do people come to you? Like what stage do they come to you at? And because this is something that obviously I'm in this space now too, more so in the grief end, but it does make me think about death, and it does make me think about, hey, I want to have a plan. I want to, like what you said, I want to involve people in my family and I want them to know this plan. So I guess maybe from your experience, when do you feel like people are coming to you on their own journey?
If they didn't have like end of life plans set. So it's more of like I think it'd have to be who I can talk to about this, or I saw that Instagram account that relates to this. So it's kind of like I'm feeling like that's when people are coming. What hasn't been as effective is that like if I reach out to other people and they're just like, oh, okay, like this is cool, like I support you, but maybe not right now. So
Mm,
it took me a while to realize like everyone's also on their own journey. So this
yeah.
will affect them at different times. And there could be some people, like friends and family especially, who they might never feel like they need this support, and that's okay too. And I have to be able to like give them that space.
What would you want people to know about end of life planning and why it's important?
Yeah, so what I'd want people to know is that it can be as simple as like thinking, what song do I want played at my funeral? Because I feel like I've used that as like a kind of like a intro gateway question,
Mhm.
so that people can just think about something simple and it helps them. It's like it feels like easier because they're like, oh yeah, what are my favorite songs? And that kind of leads to like other things that's like, okay, what's actually important to me that I would want. So yeah, I feel like it's just not as like there's a way that like doesn't put a lot of pressure on you where you're like, oh, okay, this whole day I have to do all these documents and all these I have to have everything planned out. And it's important because it also helps like I think the more obvious reason is that it helps like say if I were to or when I pass away or when I die, that my family doesn't have to think about like certain decisions or certain like details. Like I already have it all mapped out for them that like, oh, this is what I would want.
Mm.
If you follow it, cool. If you don't, like, yeah, I'll come back and haunt you.
I was
Like
gonna say the
yeah,
same thing.
that's what everyone says. You're like, I'm gonna come back and haunt them. But it's also me learning, like, while I'm alive, that I have to let go of that control and trust that they'll honor me in the way that I hope they'll honor me.
Hmm.
So it helps with that, like just letting my family not have to think about all these details, but just letting them have space to grieve is, I
Yeah.
think, important. And then also to just start those conversations. Like, I'm noticing that because I have an end of life plan and I talk to at least my mom, I talk to her about it. She's a little more open to hearing about it. Then it's kind of helped her open up about like what she would want to. So it kind of
Yeah.
helps, like, like open up the space to talk about it.
Yeah. So I'm visualizing this plan, right? Because even my wife and I have had these conversations, especially becoming moms now, is okay, well, like if we were to die suddenly and both of us, right? Like say we were
Hmm.
in a car crash or something like that, that like who would then take our child, and what are the documents we need to have set in place, or even just having a trust and the outlines and the different rules to that trust so that people would know how we would want to use that. Um, so as the death engineer, are people coming to you to not only plan how their death wants to be, but are you also assisting them with any paperwork or having them set up trusts or estates or going through that? And then medical, like what does the whole plan consist of? And then are you also actually helping them navigate the actual death, like as a death doula? Um, and because this is all still new to me, even understanding, what can be beneficial for people listening to say, okay, I need to go to the death engineer. The death engineer is going to help me with this. And so what is that whole, spectrum of all the things you're able to support with look like?
Yeah, a lot of people, their question is like, what is end of life planning and what counts as that? And then I had mentioned like, oh, yeah, it's simple as thinking of like what song you want played at your funeral. But then when it comes to like all these documents, they could feel like very intimidating. And
Yeah.
then, like if you just Google it and you print it out yourself, then it's kind of like having to read through all like that legal like terminology too can feel
Mhm.
like really, especially if English isn't your first language too, like it
Mm,
can feel
yeah.
intimidating. So what I like to do is like, I know too, and I've like talked to other death doulas about this, where there is like a boundary we don't want to cross when it comes to like the legal things and the medical things. Like we're not allowed or able to like be too
At
involved in
times.
that. Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. So then I like to provide like guidance more of like, if someone's like, okay, I want to create my will and I want to use like one of those websites. So I
Mhm.
kind of like do research for them and I say, okay, well,
Oh,
here are
okay.
your options. Here are the pricing differences. Because sometimes even like getting in front of your computer or on your phone and doing research is already overwhelming
It
too.
is.
And sometimes also I've had friends who like if they just don't have time in their week, or also like knowing that it's like a lot of mental work to do that
Mhm.
research, then I really enjoy like helping people just do that first step of like, okay, here are your options, here's what you can do, and if they want to talk through it, then I can help with that also.
Okay. Yeah.
And then I focus more on like the end of life planning part of it, mostly because that's where I got a lot of my inspiration from. Like my grandpa who died, and he had a lot of things like planned, and that he was already talking about it. So I was always inspired by that. But I also do feel like a spiritual connection to
Mm.
death and the afterlife and my ancestors. That's where if I ever had the opportunity to like guide someone through a death, that's where I would still feel very drawn to that. I just
Mhm.
haven't had like that privilege of like walking anyone, or guiding anyone in my family or close circle to like the transition. Yeah,
Yeah.
but I think like those moments where I have been there at the last like days of someone's life, like in my family, I've always still felt like a strong connection to that. Where
Yeah.
like my family's Catholic, so I take points of things from that I want to continue in my life. So I pray to like my ancestors, and I pray that they'll have like a smooth transition and things like that. So that's where I do it in like my own way.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you bring up a lot, like even culturally, which I love, and we share the same culture. I'm half Filipino as well, or well, I'm half Filipino, and just really understanding how cultural plays a part in how we grieve, how we approach things in day to day. Like, I'm glad you brought in the accessibility with language too, right? With English as a second language. I find that I have been a part of that growing up with my mom being an immigrant. And even though she has a good grasp on the English language, I still feel like there are still some things that need to be explained, even as I was taking her through setting up a trust, which I'm glad that she was open to and received well. But I'm wondering, is using your Filipino culture as an example, what do you want people to know about the impact of cultural identity on grief?
Ooh, yeah. I feel like that there's a lot attached to that because one, I've noticed too when I talk to my other friends, I have a lot of friends who are Filipino and a lot of them are children of immigrants,
Mhm.
is that like, like each family kind of goes through it differently, approaches it differently, even like, especially when like the religion is different too.
Yeah.
So it's like, but at least speaking for my family, what I've experienced is that it's hard to like I'm finding it really difficult to have those like vulnerable moments where we can just
Mm,
like sit and talk about grief. And like when someone in our family dies, that kind of helps open it up a little bit where oh, if someone sits and they start crying, it's not weird. But
mm,
then what's interesting is I'm a crier, so I cry at like everything. So it's like if we're at a family party, maybe it's already been like years since someone died, I'll
mhm,
still cry about them. But
mm,
then it's like I want to be able to talk to someone about it or share a memory. And I'm finding that like my family is like starting to exercise that muscle of being open to talking about our family members who died. And my mom, like I'll give a big shout out to my mom and I hope one day she'll listen to this, episode because sometimes like we're like sitting and we're just catching up about things like when I come visit her at her house and I start crying about talking about my uncle or my grandpa and then she starts crying too. And then she says like, it's okay to cry. And it's
mm.
like so like validating to hear that when growing up I've always like as a kid when you cry and they're just like oh it's okay stop you stop
Yeah,
crying you don't have to
yeah.
cry and
Mhm,
owning my sensitivity so I feel like in my family especially as like like my mom and her siblings who are immigrants I feel like they've had to keep that strong exterior and just keep
yeah.
their just like stay on the path they're on. They're like, be grateful we made it to this country. But
Mhm.
then now it's like it like warms my heart whenever I get to see them be vulnerable and emotional and be able to show that. And I also want them to know like I can always be someone in the family who holds space for their emotions. But it's harder too with like that like generational thing we have in our family where you respect your elders, they know what's best. And if you're
Mhm.
like lower in the hierarchy of the family tree, they think that you might not have as much to offer.
Yeah.
But I think it's kind of changing, at least with me and my cousins, showing that we can like change things up in our family, like that other generations weren't able to do.
Same, same. I've been experiencing that too, just in it is. I feel like there are those cultural things that maybe prevent us from expressing emotions or sharing those emotions. And, me being raised here in the US, there's also those two different conflicting cultures as well. And for me being wanting to be someone who speaks up, like, start a podcast, start talking, start sharing the stories. Whereas maybe, and I'm just using my mom for an example, is like maybe they're not as open. But you can look at my dad. My dad's also from a generation from the South, and as a Black man, that he also is not so open to talking about the emotions and was also brought up with that toughness of, to say quite bluntly, like people die, like, and we keep moving on. Like you said, like we got to keep staying on our path. And I've seen those similarities between the two different cultures of my mom and my dad. To then where does that leave me? Because I will say, they've experienced a lot of grief in their life. And so sometimes when we look at generations and the grief that they have experienced is, it's like they've kind of built up this toughness against it. and maybe didn't have the outlets like we have now in this generation to share and to connect with others and to be validated. So it's about kind of breaking that cycle, even whether it is a cultural or generational cycle, for us to change these conversations on death and grief.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It's like because I'm realizing too, it's sometimes like even like my experience being Filipino American, and especially with other cultures, that if they're like also immigrants to America, and like you said, balancing that with like, oh, Americans, they'll talk to their like parents. I've noticed like talk to their kids about like really like heavy topics at a young age, or just a little more open about things, you know. And I've experienced it with like, I had a teacher in high school where she's half American, but like half Chinese, half
Mhm.
British actually. But then she grew up in a very American culture, and she was actually
Mhm.
always surprised by like, oh, why don't you just talk to your mom about this? And I'm like, oh yeah, we don't talk about that, you know. And it was
Yeah,
about like, you know, like just very American topics to talk to your kids about. Or we
yeah.
watch movies and we're like, oh yeah, we don't do that. Like, you don't do that in our family.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And it's also to say it could just be different family dynamics too,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, and to be able to just understand we're speaking from this cultural lens, because even let's say affection, like I used to
Mm-hmm.
coach college basketball. And so when I would interact with the student athletes, it always surprised me how much they talk to their parents. And like, she's like, oh, yeah, like I talk to my mom and dad every day, or they're calling me and in all this, or they would want me to give me a hug and be like, hey, coach. And I would be like, no, like, I mean, for all the other reasons too, but keeping my bubble, but like hugs and
Mm-hmm.
affection and that like even sense of care with these phone calls, that just it wasn't. And I thought that was everybody else. i
Mm-hmm.
thought i thought that's just how everybody else was, until I was exposed to so many different experiences with this team. And that was like my first, I feel, I mean, I was always aware of it, but I was like, oh, and like, how do I change this? And I wasn't a crier back in the day, but now I am. But that's taken a
Yay.
lot of work. And it's like, because kind of like what you said, people would be like, don't cry, don't show your emotion, definitely brought up that way. But now I'm like, no, I want to, because it's a little bit more painful to keep it
Mm-hmm.
inside for me. So how do you help families, I feel like, or your clients, um I guess, say hello to their grief? How do you help them acknowledge or take that first step to say like, I'm grieving?
Yeah, so since I kind of market myself more with focusing on end of life planning versus with like some people say like, oh, I'm a grief coach or a grief companion. But then what's interesting is that in every end of life conversation, grief is always in there.
For
So
sure.
grief's like, just hanging out, just like, okay, I'll come in when it's not my time. It's like, oh, all right, let's, like that's how I feel like grief is just always just there, like in the
Yeah.
shadows, but in not a creepy way. They're just like patiently waiting until they're welcomed into the conversation.
Mm.
So that I feel like it's always like sometimes like if I talk to people about end of life planning and they say like, oh, I really want this and this, and they say it's because at my like grandma's funeral I didn't see that, or so that's why like. And I always love hearing about other people's like loved ones or anyone who's kind of impacted like the way they see end of life or affected their end of life journey.
Mhm.
So that's kind of like I like to like hold space for that. And it's funny because my sister just asked me yesterday, like randomly, she was just like, oh, so like how do you help people with like grief? And then I was like, well, I'm not a therapist and I'm not a mental health professional, so there's that boundary that I don't cross. But
For
then I
sure.
also like, I feel like one of my superpowers is being able to hold space for someone and empathize with them, and also just let them like kind of like being able to help someone navigate through all those emotions in a way that I'm not there to like help them feel better, but it's just like just them being able to like talk to someone who's already comfortable with talking about these very heavy things. And so it's like finding like it's like I want to feel like I'm that friend in your friend group who, like, oh, I have these thoughts about like what I want at my funeral. If I go to Marielle, she's not gonna be weird about it because that's
Mm,
just like her thing, So just
yeah.
to be like that person that you can go to.
What's it like? I know you've hosted like different tables at different events, and what is that like to engage people in those dialogues and to kind of welcome them in and be able to say, "Hey, like let's talk about death," and do
Yeah.
that. What have been some of the responses that you've gotten from folks, and what are some of the commonalities that people have when they're talking to you?
Well, I thought about different approaches to like having like I've had a table at a it's more just like an outreach table, so I wasn't sharing anything. I mean, I wasn't selling anything, but
Mhm.
then it was at a Filipino American festival. So I was like, okay, let me just see how this is. And then I thought about different approaches where it's like, okay, do I want to be like just more of like, hey, like, hello, like being more gentle about it. But I was like, that's not really my style. My style is to like just throw out like the serious question on the spot and whoever reacts, reacts. So I
Yeah.
actually had a board that said, what song do you want played at your funeral?
Mhm.
And then people can write on a post it like what song they want and put it up there. And it was really cool because people would walk by and they would like give it a strange look. But then like a few minutes later I see them come back and they're like, okay, I have like my song now that I want to put up. So I feel
Mm,
like for me like that question helped like I was mentioning earlier, like it kind of made it like something that's like less pressure to think about. Because if I said like something that's like, do you want to be buried or cremated or what do you want? Like
yeah.
that's pretty heavy, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Even though I know I can ask my mom that. I'm like, so mom, like, did you think about it? Like, I know you said you
Yeah.
want to be cremated. What do you want? But then these are like just people walking by. What also helped was this event was actually a few blocks from the UC Berkeley campus.
Okay.
So
Mhm.
I got like some people who came through that I think that they might have been more part of like the Gen Z um like generation, and I'm a millennial, so I'm already
Mhm.
appreciating how Gen Z's a little more like open to talking about like even more things than millennials
What
are.
age group is that again?
Gen Z, I feel like it's like I know for sure. Okay, my cousin is like 23 and he's
Okay.
Gen Z.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he has like a whole other language. I can't even like all these like terms that they
Yeah.
use. Yeah,
My niece
it's
and nephew have taught me a
oh
few.
yeah, and it's kind of fun because like so it's funny because like I'll just mention one because me and my friends were talking about it and it kind of relates to this too. But they say like a term that's like do like a phrase like do it for the plot. Have you heard of
Huh.
that? So,
No.
so I'm all over TikTok. I don't post, but I just like learn.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I saw it from there too, but I love it because it's like that whole like main character energy and like we're living our life, but what if it's just like a story? So it's like
Uh-huh.
I'm like, oh, did I just create my like death Instagram thing to just do it for my plot?
Oh,
I'm
wow.
sure like all the Gen Z people are listening to this and they're like, that is not how you're supposed to use. But
It's so funny because since we've been talking about death, I was like, "Oh, wow, like, do it for the plot." I was thinking of, like, the
the
gravesite,
burial.
like, the burial plot, and so
Okay,
I was like, "That makes sense, let's do it for the plot, like, let's do it for the life well lived."
I
Like
like that. I love. I didn't even think. I think also in like puns and wordplay. I did not
Yeah,
think of that at first. Oh my
yeah,
god, I love that
yeah.
too. And then yeah, and then all the I'm gonna have my cousin listen to this and he'd be like, "Yeah, that's not." But it's our interpretation, right? So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
but yeah, so the event, so when I had them come through, and it was so cute because they're like these college students. Because I had asked them like, "Oh, do you go to school at Berkeley?" Da, da, da. And they like busted out their like Spotify playlists, and
Mhm.
they're just like sharing it with each other. They're like a group of three friends, and they're all like, "Oh, that song! Oh, that's a good song!" They're like, "Oh, I forgot about that song," and they're all like writing down what song they would want. And I'm like,
Wow.
"How are they so cool about this?"
Yeah,
And then I just can't like it's exciting to think of like when they walked away from this event, did they continue the conversation with each
yeah,
other? So that's where like these events are fun because it's also just like I'm also like very comfortable with like these kind of like outreach events, like standing at a table and getting awkward looks, but also people who want to come and talk to you, and it's just like just everything is always awkward at first, but I'm also like, after the pandemic, I think everyone's just kind of socially awkward in a way. So why not just throw out like a question about their funeral, right?
Yeah. Yeah, why not? Let's just start there.
Yeah.
So we're ignoring it anyways.
Yeah, exactly. So let's just
Yeah.
get like, was it like instead of small talk, it's like they call it big talk. So
Oh,
yeah.
I like that. I like that, right? Like, let's have the big talk, like, cut
Mm-hmm.
out all the small talk. Yeah. It's so interesting because it's like I experienced the same thing too. Because like I have my merch, right? And so it's like I'll wear out one of my Hello I'm Grieving bags and it or like a t-shirt, and I have literally had people like stop me on the street and be like, what do you mean, like what is that, and just to see grief, or just to see, hello I'm grieving, or like probably for you too, like the death engineer.
Mm-hmm.
It's like that, to be so bold to just put it out there. I think it makes people stop and think for a second, to
Mm-hmm.
say either what the heck are you talking about, or like me too, right? Like as in saying like, yeah, let's talk about death. Like this is an interest of mine as well, and I feel like death can be one of our biggest connectors,
Mm-hmm.
for people to find that. Do you feel like when you do just come out with that big talk, like what are things that people immediately start talking to you about?
Yeah, at the event, I remember someone came up and they mentioned about like they just randomly said, "Oh yeah, my grandma died last year."
Mhm.
And then I love like cuz I wish that like society was accepting of me just being able to tell someone on the bus like, "Oh yeah, I'm grieving my grandpa today. Can I tell you about him?"
Oh,
Right?
wow.
So
Yeah.
so it's like to be able to be like, "Oh yeah, this is a space where it's okay to just drop
Yeah.
that and not no one's going to think you're weird about it." So I love that she had shared that. Other people also just they mostly say like the memory of someone who had died, or like or just like, "Oh, this was like my mom's favorite song. I would really want it at my funeral." So I feel like that's where like I love and I think what I love about that interaction is that it skips all the small talk. It's
Yeah.
just like, "All right, tell me about your grandma then." Like, so that's usually what people like share about, but then like I said, like a lot of people had the strange looks walking by, but at least they're
Mhm.
thinking about it.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
my thought,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think even I love that example you gave about the bus, right? And just being able to say, "Hey, this is what's happening with me today. Can I tell you?" Is because I do think people are searching for those safe spaces,
Mhm.
whether it be someone else sitting on that bus, whether it be in a group, whether it be in a networking event, right? Like
Mhm.
they just want to know that it's a safe space for them to carry with them all that they're carrying with them, and that they
Mhm.
won't be judged for it, as well.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, there was one time I was on the BART train, so that's like our public transit system here in the Bay Area. And then it was interesting because I was sitting next to this person and they like the train was delayed, so we were kind of like stalled for a little bit, which happens a lot in the Bay Area. And this
Mhm.
was, I think, pre-pandemic time, so it was kind of crowded in the train, all that. So we started a conversation, and I don't even know how we led to like talking about death care. Of course, I mean, no, I know how it led there because I could lead every conversation back to death and grief and something
Same.
in that. Yeah, yeah. It's like I think that's one of our superpowers too. It's like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, the weather's great. Speaking of rain, it rained at my grandpa's funeral. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
so like that art of doing that. But we ended up like I ended up learning that he had guided his mom through she did like medical aid in dying, like
Oh,
that
wow. Yeah.
process. And he
Yeah.
just shared that with me. And then so he's like, I'm really appreciative of people in the death care space, especially the ones that are a little like, not the like traditional route that people take.
Yeah.
I was like I don't know. I always believe when those like conversations happen, especially with strangers, that it's like it was meant to be. Out of all
For
the
sure.
BART trains, all everything running, like I sat next to him, and we eventually got to that point where he got to share that with me, and then I was like, what an honor it was to like get to hear that from them of like talking about their mom. And who knows, some people, what if they're just like wanting to just share something? Because I've had that feeling where like when my grandpa died, I was on the train to work like a few days after, and I was like, I just want someone to see me crying so I can tell them about him. Just wanting like
Wow.
that space. And it's even more
Yeah.
impactful when it is a stranger, because then it's
Mm.
almost like you share that moment together, and then it's like, cool, thank you. I needed what I needed, and I hopefully like that helped them too. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a special story. It's a reminder to like be that stranger,
Mm,
right? Be
yeah.
that stranger that is there to validate and witness, and
Hmm.
again, be that safe space for you.
Hmm.
Since you mentioned that the right to die, right? In that conversation, as you're helping people plan their end of life, what do you think listeners should know about our choices with end of life? And maybe what are some of the different maybe examples or I guess ideas that people can probably take with them after listening to this when they're starting to think about their own end of life?
Yeah, I know this one you might have mentioned earlier about like how it can change. So, like taking the pressure off, if I put in my end of life plan that this is what I want, it can still change in the future, even tomorrow. So it doesn't have to feel like it's set in stone. So I use this online profile. I'll give them a shout out. It's called Cake. So join
Oh yeah, I've
cake.com.
heard them.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and then you can store your end of life plans on there. But what I do is that on the birthday date, like my birthday date every month, I check on my end of life plan again. So it kind of leads up to like every each one of my birthdays. I like always like sometimes I share about it, like, oh, these are the updates to my end of life plan, but it like leads up to that. So it's just knowing that it could change. Like, I mean, I like put in my end of life plan that I want like hot Cheetos served at my funeral, but I'm starting to like realize like, yeah, hot Cheetos like hurt my stomach, and I'm, maybe like, it's like,
You want people to be comfortable.
yeah, yeah, and it's like, what's gonna be like red fingers all over the place. Actually, that might be kind of funny, but it's just like the details of like, oh, that could change, and who knows, like I might not want, like maybe I find more songs that I want played. So it just takes the pressure off of like, if you start your end of life plan, it's not like you have the plan, like it's a whole journey of
Yeah.
that. Like also when I'm on my, if I get like the privilege of being on a deathbed and getting to still voice like what I would want, that might change too once
Mm.
I'm in that moment of like, oh, okay, it's real. Like
Yeah,
actually
that's
let's
true.
like let's revise my plan on the spot. Someone get me
Yeah.
a laptop. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. What are like some creative ideas maybe you've seen, whether it's in your own research or anything that you've done or heard that you feel like people could add to their end
Hmm.
of life that they can think about?
Well, my cousin who died this year a few months ago, I love that like the family like took a shot for him at the like of alcohol, like
Yeah,
at
yeah.
the. But then it's also like the like getting to like just cheers together. But
Mhm.
then it's weird because like I guess some people might not associate like, oh, you don't drink at a funeral, and also we were like right in
Mm,
front of the church, so I thought that was
yeah,
really cool. But and it's like that might not sound like creative like in the artsy sense, but it was also just like something that's not traditional too. So I
yeah,
loved like seeing like my nieces and nephews like getting to do one big thing with everyone there together, and then getting to honor him in the way like, like finding ways to like honor the people like and how they live. And I guess like my family and I feel like we're finding like there's like the we create like the slideshows for them. I
mhm,
feel like, but then there's different ways to like make it, like if someone wants to sing a song that honors like the person, like if it was their favorite song, I feel like that one, like it's interesting because it's just like the most simple things that I feel like are like still big gestures to people that mean a
mhm.
lot to them. I know for mine, like food is gonna be a big one. So I for
Mhm.
sure like my funeral's gonna have a chocolate fountain. Like that's
Okay.
just it's gonna be, yeah, it's gonna be that. It's and, like I was talking to my mom. I was like, oh, like my mom always wears like tie dye shirts. I was like, what
Mhm.
if we all like like wear tie dye shirts
Yeah.
to your funeral? So I feel like it's gonna be in finding all like the details that never felt big when they were alive, but
Mm,
then
mhm.
that you can hold on to and that help like you stay connected to them. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess it isn't like the big demonstrative
Mhm.
thing, right? It can be all those finite details that can go into that end of life planning. And I know Elisa, the director of the Pause program,
Mhm.
she shared if you're going to bring flowers, bring sunflowers
Oh.
because it was her mom's favorite flower. So
Mhm.
what it did is it kind of ended up being the whole room was just filled with these sunflowers, and I thought like that's great, right?
Mhm.
Um,
And there's like that special connection back to,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, for
yeah.
my cousins too. I know they had like two or 3 days for his viewing and for his wake. And I know one day they told everyone to wear like San Francisco 49ers gear.
Oh, cool.
And I think
Yeah.
the other day was like San Francisco Giants gear. So I
Oh,
thought that that was like really sweet. That was like it was such a nice idea to honor him.
yeah. Do you do even thinking about ideas, and maybe you can share some too about what to do with the body?
Oh
I
yeah,
know
I
that's a big one, right? So
yeah,
what
I
are you
love
got
that.
excited? You lit
Yeah,
up.
yeah, I
So
got well, I got
so
excited because
so
like
what are some of like the pretty, I'm just gonna say cool ideas on like what you can do with your body as you're listening to this and say, hey, I never thought about this before, but that sounds interesting. I want to look into that.
yeah, I got really like recharged when you said that because and excited because I love like helping people realize like you don't have to be placed in a casket and then, buried at a cemetery, which is like our family's done that, for like centuries, I guess, like for forever, we have like the cemetery in the Philippines where like I can just like visit everyone all at once. So it's like a family reunion at that cemetery pretty
Yeah.
much. But then my uncle, when he died from COVID in late 2020, and he was actually, I think he might have been the first one in like our family lineage who actually got cremated. And
Mm,
and I love that like they chose his urn to look like the ocean and that like my grandma was still able to set up the altar for him. But just like the thought that like, oh, everyone's always done it this traditional way and then to do it differently, and now I'm trying to introduce like even other ideas to my family. So one idea that I love is there's this company called Parting Stone, and they can turn
okay.
your ashes into stones. And I
Hmm.
love that idea where it's like, okay, if I like, it's one of my backup ideas on my end of life plans. So I was like, okay, if you can either keep it, but I know that everyone who knows me, they'll die eventually. So how about you just like leave it in a park somewhere randomly?
Oh. And it's a
Just
different way to spread ashes, right? Like that's
exactly.
pretty cool to be able to do. That's a really great idea.
Or if you like skipping stones, just like throw me in a lake or something. I don't know. Yeah,
Yeah. And you
and
could
just the
probably get it
thought.
engraved too.
Yeah,
Like maybe
that
you can get
too.
the stone engraved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just like thinking of that, and then there's also like the body, like the what do they call it? It's like the decomposition. It's called. There's a company called Recompose, and like oh, okay. You can cut this part where I'm thinking because I'm trying to remember
It's
what
okay.
uh composting. Okay, here, I'll
Yeah,
come
there
back.
you go.
So
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
a company called Recompose where they do human composting. And
Mm.
then so it's like if you want to then take that and then like spread it in a garden or something,
Yeah.
because it's
Yeah.
something that like especially like my mom, like she has a garden and I'm still like gently introducing these different ideas to her, because she actually just said like a few months ago or in the past year she was like, yeah, maybe I'll get cremated so you can like scatter my ashes, in my favorite
Mhm.
places. And then
Yeah.
so I love that they're like, to realize like sometimes you don't realize that there are other options until you like
Yeah.
learn about them. So I
Yeah.
love like that's part of like end of life, like the exploration part of it, where it's like, okay, what else can I do? Because I hate the thought of like being, just underground and like that's it. And taking up that space on this land that isn't even ours.
Yeah. 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 I've same with you. Like I've mentioned in another episode that I have my sister's ashes and I had them made into jewelry. And so I was thinking, well, I definitely want to be cremated just because of financial costs too,
Hmm.
right? But then also that maybe that could be something that I want is I want to pick out what jewelry goes to whoever and
Hmm.
have that be given to folks, right? So I'm still thinking about that with my end of life planning, what I want to do. And I know there's been like people can plant themselves in trees. That was always something that my sister had kind of talked about. So we had talked about maybe even taking some of her ashes and planting a tree. And I know
Mhm.
some people do that. We haven't done it yet, but it's not to say that we can't do it still. Um, but yeah, all the I've seen people, and a lot probably comes from the ashes, right? Is I think they've done like an ice block where like you can
Oh.
send like you could freeze, and the way that they do it is then when you send the ice block out into the water, it gradually melts, so then it releases
Oh, I love that.
like
Yeah.
the ashes out. So I've seen that one, which I was like, that's cool.
Yeah,
So
that
it's
is cool.
it's just so interesting to see, what people do,
Mhm.
with the body after.
Mhm.
Um,
Like even
and
tattoos, yeah, that one too. Like you put your ashes in the ink, and then like a tattoo
mm,
artist can give you a tattoo. Yeah, that one's
wow.
interesting too. Yeah, so there's
Yeah.
like so many things, and I'm finding that a lot of people are more steering on like the like anything connected to nature.
Yeah.
So like the like anything like that I feel like that's starting to become like more popular too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for sparking our ideas and thinking about all the different things that can go into end of life planning and to, be the death engineer and to engineer how our death is going to be and have those conversations with
Mhm.
others, because I think it's very important if we can hold space and get more comfortable with talking about it, then other people will too.
Yeah.
And we can be that go-to person.
Mhm.
But we do know that Marielle is very comfortable with talking about this. So please go seek out Marielle for your end of life planning. Okay, so I'm going to ask you two questions that I ask everybody. And as we close out here today, so the first question is going to be, if you were to say hello to someone today who is grieving, what would you say to them?
Ooh. It's interesting because the first thing I thought of is to not say anything at first. So like to just sit, and if they want to cry, like sometimes I like to just feel like yeah, just like to feel like energy wise how they're feeling. Um but then I want them to know, like, say whatever you want to say. Like
Mm,
anything you want to share. I like to also, if I know someone's grieving a specific person in their life who died, I would ask them, do you want to share a story about them or a memory? But I feel
yeah.
like that first moment of just like breathing together and just like sitting there, and then if they're ready to speak about anything. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think I've heard again so many different answers, and that one's a good one too, and just a good reminder that sometimes that's all you need is
Mhm.
to not say anything at all. All right, the second question we have is, if you were to say hello to your own grief today, what would you say to
Now
it?
this it's different because now I'm thinking about my own grief, and I'm like, the
Yep.
first thing that came to mind was like, I don't know if we would have a conversation, but instead we would like if I'm personifying my grief
Yeah.
now, but we'd probably go like to a karaoke spot together and just sing our emotions out. So I think ours would be like a dance party slash disco, like at a karaoke bar, and then to like hold that space for like, because sometimes the songs help bring the emotions out. Like shout
Yeah.
out Celine Dion, Whitney Houston, some Mariah
Okay.
Carey songs.
I was
Yeah,
gonna say, what song would be your choice? You guys do a duet together.
yeah. It's like, well, well. Also, that song, was it "One Sweet Day" by
Mm,
Mariah Carey and
yeah.
Boyz II Men. Oh, that
Yep.
every time I listen to it, I'm just like the emotions come out. But if I could sing like that kind of singing, I'm like, oh, that would be so perfect to just like feel it. So yeah,
Yeah.
me and my grief, we would just jam together. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I love that. I love that. Yeah, that question always gets folks, so, I always love to hear the answers. All right. So I want to give you the opportunity and others the opportunity to say hello to you. So where can people find you? How are they going to say hello? How are they going to reach out? So go ahead and let us know.
Yeah, I think the easiest way is through so I have an Instagram account. It's all lowercase and one word, the Death Engineer. And then from there, I also have a link to my website, but website's thedeathengineer.com. So that's probably the best way. Instagram is where I like to post a lot. It's where I started, and I like to do that. Like, yeah, like I'm on TikTok, but I don't post anything there. But
Yeah.
I love like there's like what they call it, death talk. So I'm on death talk all
Yeah,
the
I'm
time.
still learning. I'm still
Yeah.
learning all the grief talks, all the
Mhm.
death talks.
Mhm. Yeah.
But
But Instagram's
okay.
where I'm at. So yeah.
Okay, cool. And the website too. So
Mhm.
I'll make sure to put that into the podcast description so people will be able to reach out and contact you.
Cool.
So
Thank you.
yeah, of course. So as I close out today, if grief has taught me anything, it is that time is our most valuable resource. So thank you, Marielle, for giving your time today. Thank you for everybody listening, giving your time to say hello to grief today. There are so many people in this world grieving the loss of someone or something, and it is not my goal to reach every single one of them. It's simply my goal to reach one, and I hope that person is you. I hope you took at least one thing from today's podcast and listening, and that helps you on your journey. Take the time to say hello to your grief today, and better yet, say hello to someone else because you never know who you will be greeting in their grief. I would love to say hello to you, so follow me at Hello I'm Grieving on Instagram or any other social media outlet at that same handle at Hello I'm Grieving and on my website, helloimgrieving.com. So until next time, I look forward to saying hello.